smartest guy with a bow tie in Chattanooga, Tennessee, David Tulis.
It is said by one free market observer that the state has an ontological necessity to expand, meaning the necessity of expansion is inherent in the nature of the modern state. It cannot, because it has a messianic pretension, it cannot reduce the scope or area of its operation, the venues in which its benevolence is to be poured, every single one of them, not one place left, not one area, not one part of human life free to escape its caresses, its embraces, its regulation, its subsidies, its supervision, and its protection, right? That is the argument that we make, the observation that we make as we defend local economy and the free market here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County. The ideas here are not trademark. You are free to use them, though I wonder if it might be wise for someone who's really thinking in terms of the market to go ahead and trademark the term Noogacentric, because that is as yet not registered with the trademark office, though it does come from me. You're free to have it and use it, and if you want to claim it as your own, and I use it at Nooganomics.com, I'll be sure to add a little circle with an R in there indicating it's registered to somebody else. I'm just borrowing it for illustrative purposes without seeking to profit off of same. This is David Tulis, and we are looking today at a familiar topic. In fact, this is our theme as we analyze the news. David Tulis here at Nooga Radio, the leading news and analysis platform in Chattanooga, giving you the means of seeing the news, the means of reading the headlines with discernment. For example, net neutrality. What is the argument for it? And what is the argument against it? What if we had hamburger chain neutrality? What if we had shipping lines neutrality? How would the thinking that applies to internet providers and developers of online services and platforms, how would that market be suffering as it has if we apply the same ideas to the trucking business? Well, we'd find ourselves in a real pickle. And thanks to Chairman Pai of the FCC, there is going to be a return to the status quo ante before the rules from the 1930s were imposed again on ISPs and these companies. I think there's a way of looking at this very complex story in terms of the main idea, right? The main idea, of course, often doesn't account for small details which struggle to assert control of the narrative. Small details which say, well, you really can't have a free market because of this or because of that. And we really don't want to have a free internet for Chattanooga and Hamilton County because of these particular details. Look how the big players are against net neutrality. That must mean that it favors big business, right? That's kind of the argument that we hear. And no doubt it is a very fraught area. Even very sharp people such as our news director here at Nooga Radio, Russell Stroud, even he says, well, it could be this way or it could be that way. So you have people who, the young millennial generation, who are, you might say, mumble-mouthed about so-called net neutrality. Even I have a son who's involved in the internet security field, and even he is sort of, you might say, indecisive or of two minds on whether the Pi proposal is to the benefit overall, right? When the government withdraws from regulation, withdraws from peremptory action, is it better overall, or is it good to have the government in control and then the key players who are its favorites, who can withstand the heat and friction that regulation causes? Is it good for them and bad for the challengers, right? And you always have to have in view, I suggest here in Hamilton County, the challengers, those small upstarts, such, let's say, RevTel in Cleveland, a small ISP, or Peace Communications here in Chattanooga. They're small internet service providers, and are they held back? Are they retarded in their expansion of service to new people? Are they made reluctant to expand their services to people who are hard to reach, right? People who may not be able to be profitably reached under the current circumstance, but who might be profitably reached, though with a minimal profit, under a freer regime. I'm suspecting that's what Jim Peace would say, though I've not asked him. I'm just supposing that because he is a small player who who dispute in the marketplace with small mid-level players such as EPB, the Electric Power Board, that he would be in favor of the free market. And that's generally those people who do favor the free market. If they would just think through the ideas with us here on the David Tulis Show, they would be able to articulate the ideas behind liberty, the ideas behind the free market. There's a story about the Bradley County Sheriff's Office at Channel 9 this morning, and James Bradford says that there's been a change in policy in that executive branch agency and city government in Cleveland, and now officers or deputies will be able to take their patrol cars to church and nonprofit events. And the goal here, the language in this story by Alyssa Sperato is typical of how, I'm afraid, how news people describe policing in general. Their policing is widely favored even among the leaders of the oppressed classes, that would be blacks and the poor, even among leaders of the oppressed in Chattanooga and Hamilton County and elsewhere. And that support is reflected as in the media, right? The media, Alyssa Sperato, your standard reporting tends to favor the establishment, whatever is normative. In other words, it's impossible usually for media outlets and the press to reflect a hostile, anti-status quo, revisionist, or non-standard analysis. It's very difficult to maintain that. Now, there is one exception in Chattanooga, and that's Nooganomics.com, our chief sponsor here on the David Tulis Show. That platform has consistently been hostile to the establishment narrative and argued persistently for an alternative, freer perspective, which, of course, I would suggest people in Chattanooga and Hamilton County don't deserve. They don't deserve the fruits and blessings of a freedom-oriented perspective and a freedom-oriented marketplace, a genuine marketplace, right, which is untrammeled by the bean counters, who as bureaucrats always look backwards, right? Bean counters and bureaucrats always toe the line strictly to the statute or ordinance that they're enforcing, usually, and they look backwards. They're always self-justifying. They're fearful of press exposure. They're fearful of challenge, and they rely almost always on bluff and threat, and often apart from their actual authority. And so if we have an economy in Chattanooga and Hamilton County, in Bradley County, Walker County, Georgia, and Meigs County, Marion County, if we have an economy in the Chattanooga area that is state controlled or controlled by some coercive branch of a county or city government, then we're going to have less freedom and less prosperity. That is the David Tulis analysis here on Nooga Radio. And just by the way, speaking of liberty, there's a story in the Times Free Press, I think Sunday, about the Hamilton County's efforts to enforce the Airbnb licensing and tax collection regime on homeowners in the county, not in the city, but those in the county. Well, maybe in both, who have Airbnb business. The question I have, though, is what is Donna Williams at the Mayor Andy Burke's development office doing to harass and eat out the substance of Airbnb families outside of the short-term vacation rental district that the city council perhaps ignominiously created in an attempt to justify the pre-existence, if you will, of the zoning apparatus and have an unconstitutional and illegal division among like parties by creating this district. What is Donna Williams doing? The story didn't mention her, and yet that is the one that should be highlighted the most, because it is a city effort to restrain the internet. It is a very progressive and democratic theory that even the conservatives on the city council voted for, to raise a Beijing wall around Chattanooga and to restrict a liberty among private people, private parties using their homes in private relationships where money may be transferred back and forth with traded with services, a restraint upon the marketplace. This story, I think there needs to be another story written by our main press organ in Chattanooga, if I can't get to it first. And so we want to have less of that and more openness, where the government says, we're taking our hands off. We're not going to demand a license. We're not going to demand a fee. You just have at it. We want people to come here, and so we're gonna make it very clear that we are when it comes to innocent activity, harmless activity in the marketplace, we are taking a nap. We are not going to collect. We're not going to threaten. We're not going to bully. We are not going to harass. That is what, by definition, government does to support itself. Now, I understand fully well that the state is a coercive apparatus. It has to have a coercive method of funding itself, right? It's not a marketplace operation. There has to be taxation to fund the operation of the court effectively. That's the government. As you may have heard in church yesterday, government's main function civilly is the court, right? And that is the harassing of evildoers and the praising and upholding of the good and the innocent, right? That's what the court does. The modern state has rejected God and rejected the biblical limits on the civil magistrate, and has created two added branches. That would being the legislative branch for new laws. We need new laws all the time, and the executive branch, meaning we have to have someone to execute these new laws that we've written that are better than God's, right? And so with these other branches execute the law, some of God's laws, and hundreds and thousands of man's laws and regulations and ordinances. And so we have an expansion of government today that I think more and more people, even the pagan, right, even the lost heathen among us, is ruining. And by the way, the number is 800-8949. That's 800-8949. We have, I give you that number because you can call me. Okay, you, my listener, can call me. I have time for your call. All right, David Tulis here at Nooga Radio, 92.7 FM and 95.3 HD4. Yeah, HD4. That's digital, high definition digital, reaching out 65 miles from Chattanooga, the center of the world. That's what we say. We're Nooga centric, and so we have this whimsical fantasy that Chattanooga is the center of the universe. And why? Because we're here, right? And that's, I think God forgives us for that. He lets us get away with that because he made us, after all, physical beings in time and space. And so wherever on the map we happen to land, for us, this is the center, right? And this is where we have to solve personal problems, family problems, business problems, cultural problems. And if you're a Christian who went to church yesterday, hopefully you will have heard something about this dominion labor among God's people, Christian people whose job is to extend grace to others, not just privately, but extend grace to others, say, in the reform of courts, in the reform of the use of law, that would be law enforcement and policing, in the reform of morals that encourage people, women, to bear their children and not to destroy them. As we sadly make note that in 2015, 151 women in Chattanooga and Hamilton County destroyed their own children. And I do thank you for calling me. Caller, you're live on the air. David Tulis, what's on your mind?
I'd like to chime in on north net neutrality, if I could.
Go ahead.
Okay, so here's the issue with net neutrality as I see it, just from a semi-layman's perspective. Net neutrality was enacted in 2015, and now they're working on repealing it. And we haven't really seen any benefits or any hazards from net neutrality becoming law since 2015. Really, nothing has changed since then. One thing that net neutrality advocates were looking at regulating, though, was the idea of overselling, which is something that ISPs have done for years but have really never been called out on. And just to summarize it in a few sentences, imagine you have a neighborhood and each person in that neighborhood has bought a 15 megabit per second line, but the ISP has only run one 15 megabit per second line out to that neighborhood. So you're trying to drink, 15 gallons from a 15-gallon line, and all 15 people in the neighborhood are trying to drink. So you're only going to get 1 gallon. Same thing goes for these kinds of lines. So it's bottlenecking, and they're actually selling product which they do not have, which sounds to me like fraud, and it's something that net neutrality advocates were trying to get, fixed. So that's one positive aspect I can find to net neutrality.
Well, that's something like overbooking on airlines. Airlines do it all the time, and they compensate those who are bumped with a free ticket or an extra trip. That's not illegal.
Well, that's one example, sure. But when you overbook an airline, it's easy to fix because it's generally speaking, it's a one-time purchase, a one-time thing. With something like an ISP, you're stuck in your house with that really slow speed, and you're only getting 1 megabit per second, despite the fact that you're paying for the 15 megabit per second package. So you're paying for something that you're probably never going to get.
All right. So you say that the 2015 rule hasn't really had an effect. Well, if that's true, explain why there's so much objection to it among people who know, right? Objection to so-called net neutrality.
Well, the objection to net neutrality, a lot of it stems from just fear of regulation, which is perfectly reasonable. And I understand that absolutely. I'm sort of on the fence on the issue myself. I'm just a little bit focused on the overbooking, as you say, thing. But when it comes to the regulation, I mean, when you think about it, ISPs are basically government entities anyway. They use so many government resources. They have to have special tax breaks even to exist. They have to use government infrastructure to be built. I mean, look at EPD in Chattanooga. I mean, it basically is a government institution. So it's kind of like regulating yourself when you talk about net neutrality. It's just government regulating government, which it does all the time.
Well, listen, thanks so much for calling. Appreciate it.
Sure. No problem.
Well, we appreciate that call. The number is 800-8949, 800-8949. Getting back to Bradley County, about the coverage, right? The coverage, and here's how pro-policing, pro-government, pro-regulation is taught, right? This is how we're taught to accept it. And I'm talking about Alyssa Sperado's very brief little PSA, if you will, out of Bradley County. And she's quoting the spokesman, I always say a man and a woman, spokesman James Bradford of the Sheriff's Department, saying that letting sheriff's deputies take their cruisers, their light festooned, highly marked cruisers, clearly that are not unmarked cars, but marked cars, to church and to nonprofit gatherings. She says it is an effort to prevent violence in the community, with the presence of patrol cars acting as a deterrent for crime. Well, we live in an age when private crime has declined markedly. An age in which the YouTube channels are making it clearer and clearer that public crime is rampant. That public crime is rampant. That's to say, crime by not private gangs but public gangs in the nature of law enforcement. These are this is a rampant problem with violence, and we have murder, effectively murders, not accidental killings, but murders by people wearing uniforms who hold weapons. Holding objects in their hands, steel objects, whose sole purpose is death. Okay, there's no purpose for a handgun other than to kill or to maim. That's the reason that they're carried. And so it can't be an accident. It can't be just manslaughter. When one draws that, a manslaughter being an accidental killing, when one draws a thing in one's hand and aims it and fires a metal ball at somebody else with the sole purpose of the pulling of the trigger being to destroy that person. That's what a gun is for. It's not for. It's not like the axe head handle in Deuteronomy 19, where the Lord God Himself says a murder is the intentional killing, and a manslaughter is an unintentional killing for which there can be compensation made, and that is the axe handle falling off the handle narrative mentioned in Deuteronomy 5 and the cities of refuge passage, and also in Deuteronomy 19 in the similar discussion. Again, intent is required to be proven. The whole narrative, though, is of the state is we're here and we're going to have real-time intelligence services as the city of Chattanooga is expanding its operation in that direction. And I think also I saw in the past few days a story in the Times Free Press about Sheriff Hammond praising the prospect of real-time intelligence service, again, to prevent violence. An effort to prevent violence by having everywhere you go in churches and elsewhere these police cruisers. We live in an age when crime is down, right? Crime is down by half of what it was in the late 60s and early 70s. It's down by more than half. Policing is the 38th or 39th most dangerous profession, meaning there are many more that are more dangerous than it. And you have less fear from private damage to yourself than you do from public. Whether highway forfeiture, civil asset forfeiture on the highway, and other state crimes against the people, they are rampant today. And so the question is, can we think, is it theoretical that the marketplace is better and that freedom is better, or is it mythical, right? This is a theoretical good, and I think if we push for it and seek for it, we'll have more prosperity, we'll have less injury, fewer torts against private people, innocent private people in Chattanooga and Hamilton County and Bradley County. So Bradley County is not rife with crime, right? We don't have to have more surveillance, more present cars in church parking lots to reduce and prevent violence. This is the officer, maybe they're worshiping God, but in that church, no doubt, there are perhaps half a dozen or a dozen other courageous, honorable men who have weapons concealed, either under statute or privately under the Constitution. This is David Tulis, and we're glad you're giving us a minute of your time. I have got some important announcements for you, and I thank you for giving me just a minute.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4, and